Welcome to The Straight Stitch, a podcast about sewing and other fiber arts. This is episode 53, and my name is Janet Szabo. I'll be your guide as we explore all things sewing. We are well into fall here in Northwest Montana. Most of my canning is done. I do have to put everything on hold for about a week. I'm going to be traveling. This Saturday, I'm going to Ritzville, Washington for the Mennonite Central Committee Relief Sale. This is a sale that happens on the first weekend of October every year, and it's held at Menno Mennonite Church. I've been going to this sale for probably 15 years, maybe a bit longer. Sometimes I donate quilts for the quilt auction, which happens in the afternoon. This year I don't have any quilts to put in the quilt auction, but I'm still going to the sale because some friends of mine here that go to our church have a business making sausages and bacon and ham and things like that, and they sell those at the relief sale to help raise money. So I'm going to be going over to help them. I work as a cashier, and I've done it enough times that I know what I'm doing, mostly. I won't be able to stay for the quilt auction, unfortunately, because I have to drive to Seattle. I'm flying out of Seattle on Sunday morning. So when you hear this podcast, I will actually be in Cleveland visiting my mother. We are planning to take a trip down to Amish country, and I'm looking forward to going to some fabric stores and quilt stores there and seeing all of the beautiful Amish quilts. We used to make that trip when I was growing up near Cleveland, and I have lots of fond memories about that. I remember Lehman's Hardware when it was still a hole in the wall, not the big hardware store that it is now. I did finish the Natalie top and a laundry day tee that I was working on. I also took some tops out of my closet that needed to have the side seams adjusted. I made these last year, and I've never been happy with the way the side seams fit. So I took those two tops out of the closet and I undid the hems and I adjusted the side seams and re-hemmed them on my cover stitch machine. And I also adjusted the pattern, the actual pattern. So it's a Berta top pattern that I've used quite a bit in the past. It's Berta 6329 if you're interested. It's a fairly simple raglan top with a pleat detail at the front neck, and I find it to be very comfortable, so I've made several of those. But when I lengthened it, as I always have to do to my top patterns, I didn't like the way that I had flared out the bottom, so that's what I changed. When the new look patterns were on sale at Hobby Lobby, I picked up 6713, which is a jacket pattern, and Hobby Lobby had some really pretty ice blue quilted fabric that I thought would make a great jacket. So I bought the fabric and I bought the pattern, and I needed to order the zippers because it requires a 29-inch long separating zipper for the front and two 7-inch zippers for the pockets. So I ordered those and they arrived last week. So I've got that project in the queue ready to go. I still have a couple of quilts to finish and one to bind. So I have plenty to do and plenty to keep me occupied for the next couple of weeks. And I'm really happy that it's cooled off and gardening and canning season are over so that I can sew without guilt. I have an interview for you today with Tabatha Smith, who owns Camellia Palms Retreat Center in Florala, Alabama. When Tabatha contacted me, I really wanted to have her on the show because I haven't focused as much on quilting as I thought I might, and she's doing some very creative and very unique things with her quilting. And it's especially interesting to hear about those because she says, and you'll hear in the podcast interview, that when she was little and her mother tried to teach her how to sew, it didn't take. And in fact, it was a couple of decades before she was brave enough to try it again. From taking a quilt class with a friend of hers and learning how to quilt, to opening up a retreat center and now hosting an online quilting community at school.com. I think that you will be interested in her story and what she has to say about quilting. So, welcome to the podcast, Tabitha, and I'm excited that we're going to have a chat today.
Thank you so much. I am very excited to be here.
You have a lot going on, and one of the reasons that I really wanted to have a conversation with you is because a lot of your activities are focused on quilting, and I haven't done a lot of that on the podcast. I think our listeners are going to want to hear about what you have going on.
I hope so. Quilting is a passion for me.
So I usually start out by asking my guests how they learned to sew, when they learned to sew. Did someone teach you? Is quilting does it run in your family?
I would not say quilting runs in my family. In fact, I always tell people I was never meant to sew at all. My mother grew up in an era where you sewed your clothes, you sewed your kids' clothes. She sewed all our clothes when I was young. She attempted to teach me when I was about 13 or 14 years old and declared that I was unteachable and I would never learn to sew. Wasn't going to happen. So I never planned on sewing or quilting ever. And then in around 20 or 2000, 2001, my best friend said, "Hey, I want to quilt. I want to learn how to quilt." And so, you kind of get sucked in by your best friend. Kind of where I started, we signed up for a class at a local quilt shop now this was 25 years ago. I didn't own a sewing machine because I was never going to sew. I never heard of a rotary cutter or a rotary or a cutting mat. I went to the quilt shop and every Saturday, it was a block of the month, they gave you a little baggie with some fabric and instructions, and you bought a set of Marty Mitchell templates. And I traced around those templates on my little pieces of fabric and I cut them out by hand with a pair of scissors, which was no small feat because I'm left-handed and scissors are not always kind to lefties. And so I cut them out and I hand stitched every block, hand quilted it, hand bound it, because again, didn't own a sewing machine. So I made the whole quilt by hand and I fell in love. That's all I can say is I fell in love with the creative process of the fabric and the camaraderie of going to the quilt shop and meeting with people that also did that. I did buy a sewing machine after that though, because I was not going to do too many of those by hand.
I'm amazed that after all of that, you fell in love with it because to do that all by hand, most people would probably say one and done. I'm never doing that again.
I actually did the first two by hand.
Wow. Wow.
And I fell in love. And it was a learning curve for me to use the machine because I was very intimidated because I had never really wanted to do it since I was a teenager. And I still don't sew clothes. One disastrous modern pajama pants, and nope, I was back to quilts. I only make quilts. I'm from small to large, but I don't sew anything that needs arms or legs. And I don't sew bags because I break too many needles, and having needles fly at my face is just not my jam.
So does your friend still sew or still quilt?
She does, not as much as I do because she's still working a full-time job and raising a grandchild.
Where did you said that was back in 2001
Right. In Texas.
in Texas. Okay, so how did that evolve? Did you find that you liked a particular kind of quilting or did you want to try it all?
I love to try it all. I love paper piecing, applique, although I haven't done much hand applique. It's mostly been machine applique for me. One block wonders are a favorite of mine because I like being able to play with the design. I like art quilts. I don't make a lot of really large bed quilts intended to sleep under, right? It's mostly lap quilts or wall hangings, art quilts. Um, because I like the variety. I also have way too many UFOs and I'm working through those. Um, because I like the variety of being able to, I got shiny object syndrome. I see a cute pattern and I'm off on that. And bed quilts just take a lot more time and you can't get distracted as easily by something and come back to it.
So when did you move to Florida from Texas?
I moved from Texas to Washington.
Oh,
I spent 6 years in the PNW. Absolutely loved it. A lot of great quilting friends up there now. And then 2021, we moved from Washington to Florida so I could take care of the retreat center full time because I opened that in 2019 and I was flying back and forth.
Wow. Okay, so we should explain that this is the Camellia Palms Retreat Center
Correct. We're
and
located in
it
Florala, Alabama.
Florala, Alabama. Okay, and what was your inspiration for opening a quilt retreat center?
It had been a dream for me. It had been on my mind for about a decade before I actually did it. So that would have been about 15 years ago. I just wanted to. I loved sewing with other people. So many of us sew alone, and I'm not a introvert. I am a people person. I like to be around people. And so for me, sewing with other people is just it's wonderful. It's magical. And I had a group in Washington that I started and we sewed every Tuesday, even through the pandemic, even though we probably shouldn't have, but we couldn't give it up. And I love sewing with other people. You learn so much when you sew with people at in person or even on Zoom calls or live, things that maybe they're clothing makers. A lot of my friends were older, and so they were clothing makers before they were quilters. And so I learned techniques and tips from them that I would never have come across on my own. And so I really wanted to open the retreat center because I think there's something magical about sewing with other people and getting away from all the distractions you have at home. The kids, the grandkids, the plants, the pets, the dishes, the laundry, and you get focused time that you can sew and not worry about the rest of it.
My husband jokes that men would never do that, trying to explain to him that men don't need to do that, maybe.
Yeah, they tend to not realize that they don't carry the mental load of the entire household.
Yeah.
They can veg out and watch their football game, which for them is kind of like a retreat. They get together and they watch football, right? And they're not thinking about the rest of the world, the house, the kitchen, the dishes, the laundry, the kids. They're hanging out, drinking and snacking and watching football. But for us, when we're home, I know for me personally, I have a hard time stepping back from everything else that's in my periphery. I can't just zone it out, right? And focus only on the football game or whatever, right? I have to leave the environment to do that.
You started the Quilt Retreat Center in 2019. How did you get through the pandemic?
Well, we were very fortunate that we had started it in Alabama, even though I was living in the Seattle area. I couldn't afford to start it in Seattle. That was the only reason I didn't pick that because the property would have cost me about $2 million and I didn't have an extra $2 million hanging around. So we went to Alabama, we found the property and we started it. And then because we were in Alabama, the the restrictions lifted a lot faster in the South than they did, say, in the Pacific Northwest. I know somebody who owns a retreat center in Prosser, Washington, and they were closed for a whole year. We were only closed for about 2 months. And because we are a small boutique retreat, the most we can hold is 14. We were able to reopen for business a lot faster than places that like big wedding venues and stuff that counted on having 100 people. We didn't have that problem. And we sewed masks. Me and my two daughters sewed about 25,000 masks and sold them on Etsy.
So let's talk a little bit about the kind of retreats that you offer there.
We have most of our retreats are quilters. We do have a few scrapbookers that come. We just had a mixed media art retreat that just finished up called the Ugly Art Club. Um, but most of our retreats are quilters, and probably the majority of them are private groups. So they book the retreat house. It's theirs for the 4 or 5 days, however long they're there, and they do their own thing and they don't ever see me unless they want a pop-up shop. And like today, I'll be bringing a pop-up shop to the retreat group. But a few times a year, I offer open retreats for individuals where I'll teach something. In October, or we'll have an open sew. So in October, we have an open sew. In December, we have a bag class. I'm not teaching that, but one of the local quilt shops is. In January, I'm teaching collage for a retreat. In February, a friend of mine is teaching a quilted coat because, again, I don't do arms and legs. it's just too intimidating for me. Um, so yeah, most of ours are private groups, but we do have some for individuals a few times a year because I know there's a need for that. But it also requires a facilitator to be there because a bunch of strangers aren't generally comfortable staying in a house by themselves together. Yeah, that's kind of what we do.
In terms of like cooking and things like that, do you have food catered in? Do they bring their own food? How does that work?
So if it's a private group, they're on their own to figure that out. We have a big full kitchen. Some of the groups cook, some of them just go out to eat. We have a number of restaurants in our small town. We don't really have a caterer around. We do have a chef that will come and cook if they really want it. Like if they want to hire her, she'll come in and cook every meal for them. That's for the private groups. For my open sews for individuals and my instructor led ones, I have a friend who loves to cook, absolutely loves it. So we have worked out something where she will come over from New Orleans, stay for the retreat, and cook for the group. Because while I can cook, that is just not my gift. It's, it really isn't.
That sounds like a fabulous setup.
Oh, it is. It works out really well. And we provide our retreaters with swag bags and custom t-shirts. We have everything they need, design walls, cutting stations and mats, irons and ironing stations. Really, all they have to bring is their sewing machine, their projects, and of course, if they're a private group, they can work out the food cooking on their own. There's a grocery store 2 doors down, so it's really convenient.
Do you find that most of your retreaters are locals or do they come from all over?
They are not actually local. Most of our groups are from about 4 hours or so away. Atlanta, Orlando, Ocala, which is about 5 hours, Jacksonville, New Orleans, which is 4 hours. We do have a few groups that come from even farther away. We've had some from Washington and Indiana and stuff, but mostly it's a 4 to 6 hour drive for them. I mean, there are a few that come from local, Pensacola, but
Yeah.
most of them, it's like a destination for them, right? They want to get away. We're on this beautiful lake and we're only 45 minutes from the beach. So it's a retreat, for the location, the beauty of the Spanish moss hanging on the trees, the view of the lake from our sewing room. That's really they're coming for the charm of the South.
So let's talk a little bit. You mentioned that you were doing a pop-up shop,
Hmm.
and the pop-up shop is related to one of your other activities, which is Nona's Quilt Shop. Is that
Yeah, I'm on Etsy. I'm Nona Quilt Shop. I purchased the inventory from a local quilt shop who was retiring. And so I just bought her inventory mostly so I could offer the pop-up shops for our retreaters because the nearest quilt, there are a few quilt shops within a 30-minute drive, but sometimes it's nice not to have to go anywhere. And so I offer it, and if they're interested, I will load up my car and I will take a selection of fabrics and books and that type of thing to the retreat. They can shop for about an hour. And I pack it back down and take it home to the next shop, pop-up shop. And it's kind of cool. It works out really great that, I can provide that for them in case, maybe the weather's bad and they don't want to drive to the local quilt shop, right? Or maybe they don't, once they got there, they don't want to go anywhere. Um, and so I also sell on Etsy on the side, and I have fabric and I have stickers because we do stickers for our quilt shop.
your stickers are really cute and the
Thanks.
t-shirts too.
Yeah, my youngest daughter is the artist.
Oh,
She
that's
gets me
fabulous.
all the art stuff. Yeah, she's the artist of all the stickers and the t-shirts.
And let's talk a little bit about Quilt Queens, which is on school.com, SKOOL. And until you mentioned that, I had never heard of school.
It's a membership platform. And so inside Quilt Queens, you have courses, video courses I've recorded, tutorials. So I have a video course on UFOs, like how to deal with the giant pile of UFOs sitting in your quilt room that you're pretending you don't see, right?
Right?
There is a course on fabric and color and how to pull from your stash to work with a pattern and pair things together, pair fabrics together, because a lot of people struggle with that. There's a course about planning your retreats. So there are courses, and then we have a forum that is pretty cool. everybody gets in there and they can post what they're working on. They can ask questions for help because again, it's like sewing with other people. Other people may have the answers you're looking for. And this way you don't have to search through 10,000 posts on Facebook to try to find the answer that you're looking for. It's a dedicated group. And then every Wednesday we have our sit and sew, and whoever is available at the time, they'll gather and we'll just sit and talk and sew. And the topics range from what you're working on to homemade wines. And then twice a month I'll do a live Q&A and they can ask me like, how do I do this? How would you do this? What do you think about this border, right? And so whoever's on the Q&A, and we record those and have them available for replay. We do challenges. This month was a UFO challenge. Imagine that. And then because I got to work through my own. And then October is, we just finished up the UFO challenge. And then October is a group project for a tumbler table runner. And they have the option of cutting them out of their own stash, or they can buy a pre-made kit from my Etsy shop that already has the tumblers cut for you. And it's double-sided, so you got autumn on one side and winter on the other. And so you can just flip it. And we're doing that so long. So there's always a fun thing going on, and prizes for the challenges.
That sounds like fun. I love tumblers.
You do.
Yeah.
They're easy to sew. It's pretty straightforward, up, down, right? Like you
Right?
can't mess that up.
Yeah. How do you see your Quilt Queens group growing?
Well, we are planning a virtual summit next year. Um, that we're hoping to have at least 30 good speakers, and hopefully some people who've watched the virtual summit will come on into Quilt Queens. I just see it growing as a dedicated community for quilters who really want that support. They want somebody to say, yeah, that looks good together, right? Or yeah, this is what I would tweak. Or hey, let me help you with this technique. It's all about community and support. Um, without having to deal with the trolls on Facebook. I'm sorry, but you know what I mean. Yeah. Or having to deal with the algorithm hiding your question and nobody ever sees your comment or your question because Facebook is so big and it's so AI driven that people get lost. Whereas with school, we don't have to deal with any of that. We don't have to deal with spam. We don't have to deal with fake accounts, and we don't have to deal with the overwhelming amount of 200 replies that you can't even weed through, right? That about half of them have nothing to do with what the question you asked. So it's really nice that we have this community where people can ask their questions, get their help each other. It's more than me just helping them. They can help each other and encourage each other. And for example, our UFO challenge that we just ended, um, we had a little form and you could color it. You write out which UFO you were going to work in, and you colored it in as you went along with your progress. And several of the ladies who had completed their challenge said they wouldn't have ever gotten those 4 quilt tops finished had it not been for the accountability and the encouragement. But now they have that sense of accomplishment that those UFOs are no longer sitting in the corner.
And they can be cheerleaders for other people too.
Exactly, exactly. So it's a community bond. It's really that's what it's for.
You said you were the only quilt group on school right now.
Mhm.
And I think that people are probably looking for those kinds of focused small
Right.
communities because you're right, you do get lost on Facebook.
Right. I mean, there are some other types of, there are lots of other communities on school. A lot of them are like fitness related or that type of thing. But and there are a couple other craft ones, but we're the first and only so far quilt community.
That's great. Is there anything that I haven't asked you that you want to talk about?
I can't think of too much. If you're interested in doing a quilt along with us, it starts in mid-October for the Tumblr. If you know of anybody that wants to do a quilt along.
I will definitely put links to all of the websites and the groups in the show notes so that people can find the information. Do, do you already have your speakers lined up for the virtual summit?
I've asked a few people. I've gotten some interest from a few people. I just got home from Quiltpreneur. It was a business quilting retreat in Sundance, Utah, led by Elizabeth Chappell. and we had Amy Smart from Diary of a Quilter there. We had Jenna Kutcher speaking. I was just an attendee. I didn't lead it, but several of the people who were there, there was pretty much all quilters. They're hopefully going to be speaking at our summit, and like I said, we haven't set full dates yet. Um, but yeah, it's called Quilted the Virtual Summit, and people will be able to go hunt that down and sign up. It will be free. It's a free summit. There's no charge.
Make sure I get the information because
Absolutely.
we'll definitely want to promote that as we get closer.
Absolutely. I'm very excited. The quilting world, I think, is growing. More and more younger people are quilting. When I started, I was in my early 30s, and I was by far the youngest person in my guild. But I think more and more younger uh, men and women are beginning to really embrace the creativity. They don't see it as just utilitarian anymore. It's much more about expressing your creativity and building your community, which I feel like we really, after COVID, everybody really missed having their communities. Like what we thought we had of community kind of got blew up, right? And so now we're really trying to rebuild that sense of community.
And rebuilding it in creative ways. So using social media, it's not just meeting in person anymore.
Right. Well, because I mean, don't get me wrong, I love meeting in person. I am a people person, but there are, especially in my groups, a lot of them are much older, even 20 years older than I am, and they can't get out to meet in person. They may not physically be able to go make the drive to the nearest guild, which could be an hour away, or even their nearest quilt shop, right? So they don't have that ability to get out and meet in person anymore. And so by doing it online through like the virtual summit and the Quilt Queens community, they can get together, they can sew. It's just, it's your same general people every week. And it feels like a guild. It feels like the old time sewing bee. And they're from all over the country.
Well, I've really appreciated having this conversation with you, and we'll definitely keep in touch so that we can check back in the future and see how things are going.
Awesome. Thank you, Janet. Thank you. It was an honor to be on your podcast.
Oh, thank you. I hope you enjoyed my interview and conversation with Tabatha. I will put links to all of the information regarding her businesses in the show notes so that you can go there and check them out. I suspect that as much as I love winter in Montana, the idea of a quilt retreat in January or February on the Gulf Coast would be pretty attractive. If you would like to be considered as a guest on the podcast, I do have a guest form on the podcast website at www.thestraightstitchpodcast.com. If you fill that out and submit it, I will get back to you and we will see about scheduling an interview if that's a good fit. The show notes for each episode can also be found on the podcast website. My personal website is at www.janetzabo.com. That includes links to the podcast website as well as my Big Sky Knitting Designs website and my blog website, where I write about life in Montana a couple of times a week. And that's usually where my sewing projects end up. So if you want to see what I'm sewing, that's the place to check them out. As always, I would love it if you left a review or sent some feedback through fan mail or email. You can email me at janet@janetzabo.com. You can leave a review. You can leave a comment or a review through fan mail with Buzzsprout, although I can't reply to those. I do appreciate all the feedback that I've been getting. It's lovely to hear from listeners and know that I'm not speaking into a vacuum. So until our next episode, which may be a couple of weeks from now, depending on how my travel schedule plays out. Until the next episode, I hope you have a great week and that you get to go sew something.